This is a perfect opportunity to get to meet someone who has made quite a name for herself in not only in the science world but also in the autism world. How many chances am I going to get to actually get to meet her?
We followed Temple Grandin since she was a young woman and feel very strongly about what she represents.
Time Magazine, 2010 100 Most Influential People. That just doesn't happen every day around here.
I don't think it could be any more of an exciting day for me.
Is he fully verbal?
He's fully verbal.
Autism is a continuum going all the way from people that remain nonverbal and very handicapped to brilliant people like Einstein.
Thank you so much.
There's a lot of famous scientists and musicians that probably had, at least mild forms of autism. You see a little bit of the trait, and you give up some of the social circuits, you've got, you can have some real genius. Too much of the trait, and then you get a very severe problem. And what grade do you teach?
All my kids have autism.
And what age of kids? People ask me all the time if I could snap my fingers, would I want to be not autistic? I like the logical way that I think. And the older I get, the more and more I'm realizing this is how unlogical most people think.
Up here, Leo.
Temple made it okay? Say hi to your Uncle Mike.
Hi, Temple. I just been telling Billy here all about our summer visitor.
Are you a cowboy?
Excuse my niece. That's not how we greet people, Temple. You know better than that.
Hello, I'm Temple. It's very nice to meet you. Hello, I'm Temple. It's very nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you, too. Ma'am?
It's really great to be here tonight, and I think I'll just start out, tell a little bit about myself. When I was a little kid, I had all of the standard autistic symptoms. No speech at age 2.5, didn't get fully verbal until I was 3.5 to 4, rocking, all those things. I cannot emphasize enough the importance of early educational intervention. By the time I was 2.5, I was in a really good little speech therapy nursery school. When I was 3, my mother hired a nanny who played constant turn-taking games with me and my sister. And of course, back in the 50s, you had all these board games, and you had to learn how to take turns. Little autistic kids need to be taught turn-taking. Really important thing. And I was real bad at that, and I had to be taught that. Now, I have a very typical autism family history. On the father's side, we had 4 generations of bankers. And then on my mother's side, MIT-trained engineer, anxiety and depression, both sides of the family, visual thinking skills on the mother's side of the family, intellectual giftedness, say high IQ or high intelligence, and the autistic trait seemed to have some connection. Now, a good teacher kind of knows just how hard to push. If you don't push at all, you don't get any advancement. If you push too hard, then the kid goes into a screaming fit. And there's kind of 2 kinds of autistic kids. There's the ones where you can kind of yank open the front door. And then there are the ones where you have to be really careful about sensory overload. So how do you know which kid you got? Well, what happens now at the local Walmart or Target store or the supermarket? If every time you go into those places it's a screaming fit, then the child's probably got really severe sensory problems. And you need at least 20 hours a week of one-to-ones with an effective teacher. So people ask me, well, what do you do if you can't get services? Now, fortunately, Minnesota is definitely one of the better states. But I do a talk in some of the states where the services are awful. I say, well, go to your church group, get some grandmothers. You just got to get somebody to work with this kid because nothing is the worst thing you do. You don't want to let them just sit in the corner. Now, sensory processing disorder, problems with the sensory system not working right, that occurs along with many, many other disorders. Now, I like to visualize the brain as this great big office tower. Up at the top, you've got the chief executive officer. Then a little lower down, you've got the language. That's where the division vice presidents will be. And then under that, you've got the good geek stuff. Graphics department, math department, music department, all the good stuff. A little lower down, we've got the emotion, we got the human resources department down there to stir up trouble. And then coming into the base of the building, we've got the incoming data lines. And there can be a lot of stuff wrong coming in on the incoming data lines. A lot of scrambling. Some people's hearing fades in and out like a really bad mobile phone. Now, when I was a little kid, loud sounds like the school bell hurt my ears. It was like a dentist drill going down a nerve. Now, the thing is that a sound that bothers one autistic kid will not bother another one. One child's going to love running water, another kid's going to hate running water. But the sounds that tend to be the worst are the high-pitched sounds, or maybe the fear of being assaulted by a high-pitched sound. Like the smoke alarm went off last week in that classroom, so now he's scared to death to go back in there. And every time he sees a smoke alarm, he's upset. You go in, you test the child's hearing, auditory threshold, the ability to hear extremely faint sounds. That will be normal. But what's not normal is the ability to hear auditory detail. That's the ability to hear the hard consonant sounds. Many different disorders can have problems with hearing hard consonant sounds. You know, when grown-ups talk really fast, I thought grown-ups had a foreign language. It sort of went, oing, 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 oing. Now, if they spoke slowly and they spoke directly to me, then I understood. See, the problem you have in the brain of autism is slow processing speed. The brain processes information a lot more slowly. And you'll have attention shifting slowness. Many, many disorders have this. Like if I hear a cell phone ring over here, okay, I orient to that. Most people could just shift out of that like in half a second. It takes me longer to shift back and forth between two different things. And some people have problems with the visual system, where when they go to look at something, images break up and fragment. And this problem is happening back here in the back of the head. It's not in the eyeball. The circuits in the brain that assemble the graphics file are simply not working right. See, in your brain, you got circuits for color, shape, and motion. They got to work together to form a visual image. Something's wrong with how that works together. In fact, scientists don't even know how it works. That's one of the biggest mysteries of the brain. How does the brain store and retrieve a graphics file? It can do it, but how? Well, we don't know. It'd be sort of like sending a computer back 100 years to the time machine, and they're trying to figure out how it works. They wouldn't have any idea. Now, here's a sign that a kid has something wrong with the visual system. They often do a lot of eye stims. They'll look out the corner of their eye because they can see better out the corner of their eye. He may be terrified of escalators because they can't tell how to get on and off the escalator. But the biggest problem you can have in a lot of schools is fluorescent lighting. When there's something wrong with the visual system, they can see the flicker of 60-cycle fluorescent lighting. It drives them crazy. It's like trying to go to school in the middle of a discotheque. And even those little twirly lights that you screw into the lamp, some of those are horrible. Some of those are so bad that even I can see them flicker. And I am finding that visual processing problems are extremely common. You know, in a class of 35 students in my design class, I'll find one every semester that's got this problem. And I can tell by the way they do their drawings all scribbly. I want them to draw 3 half circles along a line. They simply just cannot do it. And then I sent them out sunglass shopping. And I had one student come back and say, well, I got an A on my economics quiz because for the first time I can see. Now, you've got to get the real pale colors. You know, in the 60s, we call those hippie glasses. You know, and the whole thing about seeing the world through rose-colored glasses. Well, there's some people that actually see better through rose-colored glasses. But other colors sometimes work too, like very pale lavender. Now, you have a person that remains nonverbal. They often have very severe sensory problems. And even some of the verbal ones have problems with background noise. If there's too much background noise, I have trouble hearing. Another problem is being mono-channel. You can either look at something or you can hear something, but you can't do both at once. You either have to do one or the other. Body boundary problems. Okay, you put your hand on this, especially when you're tired and you can't tell where your body ends and the table starts. That's body boundary. And people that have a lot of sensory issues, they're usually not a visual thinker like me. And the ones that have these visual problems, I can tell you right now, they will not be a visual thinker like me. They're much more likely to be an auditory thinker. And auditory will be their best sense. where for me, visual is my best sense. Now, what the research shows is autism is a true continuum. There's no black and white dividing line between a mild Asperger's, geek, and nerd. It's truly continuous, and I'm saying that really seriously. Also, the genetics is very complicated. It's not simple Mendelian genetics that you learn in high school. You see, a little bit of autism, you get a brilliant Silicon Valley scientist. Too much autism, you get a real big problem. In fact, Einstein today would be labeled autistic. He had no language until age 3. Tesla, who invented the power plant, the electric power plant, he was very autistic. What would happen to Einstein in today's school system? This is what really worries me. Hi. Hi. Oh, you got a nerd's shirt. I certainly do approve of that. I cannot emphasize enough the importance of early educational intervention. I just cannot emphasize that enough. I'm seeing a lot of smart, kind of the geeky type of kids going down the wrong path because they don't have a science teacher to mentor them. The ones that are out in Silicon Valley, they get to do fun things in Silicon Valley. You get in some other communities, teachers don't know what to do with them. I shudder as to where I might have ended up. I went out to the Tufts Veterinary School in Grafton, Massachusetts. It's on the grounds of the old Massachusetts State Hospital. And if you walk down this dirt road behind the veterinary hospital, these old bricked up buildings that are blocked up with plywood, and I think, well, that's where I would have been. Probably so drugged up and stuff on drugs, I wouldn't have been able to function, and I wouldn't be here now.
Appreciate it.
All right, great, thank you.
Temple, when animals and people die, they stay with us in our minds. We can still see them. So I think it would be best not to remember Chestnut like this, okay?
I see Chestnut the day I arrived. I see groom in Chestnut. I see a picture of a horse just like Chestnut in a book. We passed a Chestnut horse on Route 119 near a feed store. There was one in a calendar at Aunt Ann's. There was one in Life magazine opposite the page of Mr. Kennedy.
Okay, okay. Can you bring everything you've seen to your mind?
Sure.
Even if it were an everyday object like, say, shoes?
I see all the shoes I've worn, and my mother's, and other people I've met, and you have 3 pairs. One needs a new heel. And there's shoes in newspaper ads and TV ads. And...
Wow.
Can't you?
Now, my mind works like Google for Images. This is a picture a young man sent to me showing how he had movie reels inside his head. You know, all of my thoughts are in pictures. No picture, no thought. It's just that simple. And when I realized my thinking was different, when I asked people about church steeples, and I was shocked to find out that most people got this vague, generalized, generic image. I see specific ones, and I can tell you exactly where they're at. Now, there's other people that are not autistic that are visual thinkers that also do this. But I was shocked to find out that some people had no specific church steeple images unless I really forced them to dredge them up. I see specific ones, and they kind of come into my mind like a bunch of Google pictures for images. Okay, I am going to flash up some pictures, and the movie did a fantastic job of showing my thinking. Okay, childhood church, local ones, famous ones. They come up just about like that. I'll just do that again. That's about how fast they come up. Just about like that. Okay, how do you form a concept when I have all of these specific pictures floating around in my mind? You see, the really important concept in autistic thinking is it's specific to general. It's what's called bottom-up thinking. It's one of the most important things. You know, most people make a hypothesis and then try to cram the data into it. I'm like always picking up more pieces and figuring out how to put the pieces together. And this young man sent me this picture, and he's sorting cat and dog pictures in the different boxes in his brain. It's not just random. And that's exactly how pages are linked together on the web. It works exactly the same way. Well, guess what? Who's inventing the internet? Who do you think made the internet? Who do you think made search engines? The Asperger mind makes search engines. And the more I worked with search engines, and I can remember when the search engines first started coming in, and the early ones were terrible. But then as they got them to work, I'm going, oh, that's just like how my mind works. Now, being a visual thinker has really helped me in my work designing livestock facilities. And I could test run them in my mind. I thought everybody could test run facilities in their mind. I didn't even know it was a special ability until I wrote my book, Thinking in Pictures, back in the mid-90s, and I started interviewing people about how they think. Now, there's an aerial view of one of my projects that was recreated for the movie. But what this brings up is a really important thing. How did I get started when I was so weird? Because I'd show people my work. I sold my work, not myself. And I'd show people a portfolio of pictures and drawings of other previous jobs I had done. And when I remember going to the American Society for Agricultural Engineers meeting in the 70s, and they didn't even want to talk to me because they thought it was so weird. And then I'd whip out one of these drawings. And when I whipped out one of these drawings, then they started taking me seriously. They go, ooh, you did that? And we're not doing enough to work on how we get people into jobs. We also need to start teaching work skills young. When I was 13 years old, Mother had me sewing dresses for a lady who did freelance sewing 2 afternoons a week in the summer. When I was in high school, even though I was an awful student, I was taking care of 9 horses. I was building things, painting signs, shingling the barn. I did an internship at a research lab when I was in college. You know, we got to be get doing these work experiences, and we need to start that. I think it's a shame all the paper routes are gone. Well, the new paper route can be dog walking, since we're not allowed to let dogs run loose anymore. Now, so how did I get through college math? Thank goodness in 1967 or 66, when I had to take college math, it was finite math. We were in the new math craze in the 60s. It was matrices, probability, and statistics. And I had to be tutored, but it was doable. If it had been college algebra, I would have flunked it. Probably wouldn't have gotten through school. And I think it's wrong that algebra is the only math you can take. I'm not saying get out of math, but they should be able to substitute geometry or trig for algebra. And I'm sorry, algebra is not the prerequisite for geometry for certain kinds of minds. There's a kind of kid that can just figure it out without doing any figuring. And it's hard for educators to realize this kid thinks differently. And some of these kids are pattern thinkers. It's a more abstract visual thinking. Think chess, think organic chemistry, structures, think origami. And a lot of these kids, terrible at reading. They may need special ed in reading, but they need to be 5 grades ahead in math. And if you make them do baby math, you're going to have a behavior problem. And then there's a third kind, that kind of the verbal facts thinker. These are the ones that know all the weather reports. They know every movie star, every sports, person. And they absolutely aren't visual thinkers. They often really are really bad at drawing, just so-so in math. And then you've got the people where the visual perception's all messed up that are an auditory thinker. A lot of dyslexics are an auditory thinker. And you can get mixtures of these types. We need to start thinking about what kind of a thinker is a person. And this is something I really get interested in is how people think. And the older I get and I find how my thinking's different than other people's, it kind of blows my mind. Now I want to give you a glimpse into the cognition of the pattern thinker. This is not my mind. This is extreme origami. This praying mantis was made with a single sheet of folded paper. Nothing was cut, nothing was scotch taped. And the background there is the folding pattern for making that praying mantis. And I deliberately put no words on this slide except for the credit, because what I'm trying to do is to get you to enter another kind of mind. And what's happening in education today is, I think the verbal thinkers are totally taking over. I think it's a real shame that mechanical skills and visual skills, they don't even test them in the schools anymore. And we're taking a lot of smart visual thinkers, and they just go out and get in trouble and stuff like that because it's so frustrated with school. One of my big concerns today is we're getting more and more people involved in managing things that are totally separated from the world of practical things. And I think this has to do with what I call abstractification. People getting too far away from doing practical, real stuff. Now, I think a lot of people are getting an interest in return to that. You know, this is why people are getting interested in things like backyard chickens and growing their own vegetables in farmers markets. I mean, people have an urge to want to get back to the non-abstract world. Okay, in autism, we got a behavior problem. We got to go, is it biology or is it bad behavior? And if it's biology, it could be sensory oversensitivity, pitching a fit at Walmart. The kid's tired, that's probably sensory overload. Or if the person's nonverbal, a hidden painful medical problem they can't tell you about. You've got to rule that stuff out first. Now, your main behavior motivations are frustrated because they can't communicate, or if the kid's verbal, he's done baby math so many times and now he throws the book across the room and now he's labeled oppositional defiant. Okay, here are some things that we may need to accommodate. You know, the dreaded fire alarm. Maybe take them out before the fire drill. Some can't tolerate the big noisy supermarket. I can't tolerate scratchy clothes until I discovered Old Navy. Really, really soft. Okay, ask the child when he goes to read, do you ever see the print jiggle and vibrate on the page? I had a dyslexic student that had this problem. She had a horrible time with fluorescent lights. And when she was on the fluorescent lights, she would just kind of space out. It was almost like, you know, she'd taken some kind of drug. She just couldn't think with fluorescent lights around. Okay, now here are simple things that you can do. Let's say you're stuck in that classroom full of fluorescent lights. Get a 100-watt incandescent lamp, the old-fashioned hot kind, and put it next to their desk. Get the desk over by the window. Maybe wear a hat. Two other big things, multitasking. I absolutely cannot multitask. If I had to answer phones and type at the same time, that's not going to work. Cashier in a busy restaurant with an old-fashioned cash register, I have to make change, I would not be able to do it. I also cannot remember long strings of verbal instruction. You know, I like my instruction written, and I learned how to question clients about what a job was supposed to do. Here's where 50s upbringing helped me. Turn-taking in conversation and activities. Being on time. By the time I was 7 years old, Mother gave me an alarm clock, and I was expected to use it and be on time. Yep, and when I was a horrible student in high school, I goofed around in class, and I would jump my pen in class, but you know what? I was on time. Well, here's behavior that wasn't tolerated. Being rude, bad table manners, and the rules were consistent around our neighborhood. That was 50s upbringing. And I had absolute consistent discipline between home and school. There was no way I could play mother against the teacher. And the penalty for having a little temper tantrum at school was no howdy-doody show that night. Mother and the teacher worked together. Too often I'm seeing parents in the school fighting rather than working together. This is probably a very important slide. All my thinking uses specific examples to create concepts. Okay, let's say you want to teach a kid not to run across the street. Teach them at home, at school, at the library, at the Joneses, at church. You got to teach them in maybe 10 different places. Then you'll start to get the concept that you don't run across the street. It's what's called bottom-up thinking. It's going specific to general. All concepts, I don't care what they are learned by specific examples. Let's make numbers real with things that kids can manipulate. We've got to do that. I had a set of blocks like this when I was a kid. Okay, here's some little objects you can manipulate. But if you only did it with objects, then you'd think that 4 plus 5 only applied to green plastic triangles. No, it applies to toy dinosaurs. It applies to bottle caps. It applies to pieces of candy. Here's a rule system I still live with. I made up this rule system when I was in high school. I went up to a boarding school for emotionally disturbed, gifted kids. I mean, everything in the 60s was emotionally disturbed back then. Well, if you want to have a civilized society, you got to stop really bad things, like killing people and burning down buildings. Then you got to have your courtesy rules. But then I got to have some places to break some rules. Oh, and I could do things like ride my horse out in the pasture without a staff member. If I was discreet about my illegals, but not bad. And boy, I can tell you, stupid school rules, that's one of the places we've got to work on. Now, the places where I get the best, fulfillment is shared interest. We got to get kids into things like computer club, band club, music club. Some of the word thinkers are very good at stage acting. I'm not interested in social for the sake of doing social. You know, I had friends, we rode horses together. We built things together. I was in the electronics lab. We need to get kids into classes they can be really interested in. Preparing for employment, jobs for teenagers. We already talked about that. Mentors can really make a difference. If I hadn't had my science teacher, I wouldn't have, gone on through school, because I had a motivation now, and the motivation was to become a scientist. You got to take kids out and show them interesting workplaces. You know, I wouldn't have gotten interested in cattle if I hadn't gone to my aunt's ranch. Read about interesting jobs and trade journals and things. I sold my work, not myself. That's another important thing. You see, the visual thinkers and the pattern thinkers, they can show off stuff like computer programming code. You know, they've got different things to put in their portfolio. You see, the thing that drives me crazy is I see a 40 or 50-year-old Asperger employed in a good job, like IT, or maybe he runs a maintenance shop at a big meat plant, and then I see the junior edition come up to me, especially not this state so much, but some of the other states, and he's headed down kind of a handicapped rut. And it's a combination of taking all the hands-on things out, not learning work skills, not learning just basic things like being on time. This is where we got to find employers out in the community that are willing to work with them and not make a sudden change that's going to cause a problem. Hi, you a parent or a teacher?
I'm a parent.
People tell me that I'm inspiration, and he's fully verbal, and
He is, yeah.
I try to answer people's questions. One thing I try to do is give people practical information that they can take home and use. You know, it makes me happy if somebody comes up to me and they say, well, you know, your book enabled my kid to go to college. That makes me happy.